Hi there, and welcome back to Behind the Why. It has been a while since I've been here. Took a little time off with my wife. We did a little traveling, saw some family, saw some sights. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about that today. But in the meantime, if you haven't liked or subscribed to the channel, take a moment to do that now. Hit that little bell so it'll ring when we get a new installment dropped for you. But today, my daughter and I, we're going to be talking about in their own words. Welcome to Behind the Why. This is the Ray Ellis Podcast. Let's get behind the why. Before we go any further, I want to start with a passage of scripture which gives context to what we're going to be talking about today. One in the passage of scripture is taken from the book of Romans 3:23, and I'll read it from the King James. It says, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." Nice, simple statement.
True. Yep.
Now, before we begin our discussion of in their own words, so bear with us, please, audience. Just as brief as you can, tell me what you think that means.
The verse,
"For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." What does that mean?
that every single person has sinned and is not
All the white folk have sinned and they're evil?
white, brown, purple, green.
So
every person ever.
So CRT is right about that. All the white people are messed up, right?
Yeah, they are.
Okay, and all the black folk, they sinners too?
Yep.
How about the brown folk?
Oh, yep, them too.
The Indians?
Yep.
Chinese?
Every single person.
All of them? All the nations of Asia?
All just wrecked.
Okay, so we're all screwed up.
Mm-hmm.
Can we start off by saying that? We're all screwed up.
Every single person.
All right. So that brings us to the foundation, because as we begin to listen to a lot of conversation with, especially in this political arena, and it becomes increasingly difficult to separate in casual conversation, sometimes the discussion of life or even Christianity or religion from the political arena. Which begs the lie of the compartmentalization that we hear so much about. Everybody's just one big smush of stuff. Okay. So we talk about in their own words. This was a study that was commissioned by the U.S. government back in the early teens and 20s. That was an effort to capture the thoughts of those who had been freed from slavery. Remember, slavery ended in 1865. We came into the industrial age. And so what was hoping to do is capture those thoughts, because that was a part of America's legacy and history that was passing off the scene. It was never going to be again, thank God, and it's not here today, regardless what you want to think. We're not in slavery today.
Right.
So they took an attempt to capture those thoughts. And if you haven't seen, you can get in a visual presentation of it. There's an audiobook, or if you like to just read, there's also the traditional print version. But it interviews these several slaves and asks their question, what slavery was like. So what I want to do today, as we just talk, again, because I've heard so much deception in this political arena, taking the words of civil rights leaders and changing them out of context to say something that they didn't intend and that they did not demonstrate. One of the most famous, of course, is the Dr. King speech. "I have a dream that one day my 3 little children will be judged by what? Not the color of their skin.
By the content of their character.
But by the content of the character." I forget the lady's name who was giving a presentation, who said, if you're judging, it was a guy. He said, if you're judging me just by the content of my character and not taking consent, the color of my skin, then you're doing me a disjustice.
Right.
We're taking their words out of context. And so one of the things that we did, and I know I'm just kind of a long intro, but I want to bring this back, because as you are in this world now, especially as a young millennial, and you're hearing these concepts of sex, gender, and the political roles that we're supposed to play as people in America, especially as a black man. If you say, I'm a Republican, he's like, ooh.
Oh, you just broke a code.
Yeah.
Right.
So we want to go back to what makes that okay, what makes that real, what's the real deal here? And then we want to bring it back to the fact that, there are racists in America. There are racists in America.
And murderers.
And murderers and child molesters. There's burglars.
Right.
There are racists.
Right.
But that's not who America is.
Yes.
And that's the point that I would make by that, is that when we say there's racism in America, absolutely. But it's not racist.
It's not who we are.
Exactly. I just heard a guy the other day talking on radio about having to find somewhere to stay and move. I'm like, I have never been denied a home I wanted to buy.
Well, just like you said, when people talk about, as a black person, I can't stop at certain hotels, driving cross country. It's like, okay, which ones? Because we've driven across country how many times?
Oh, literally speaking, probably 70 times.
And have you ever?
Never.
See, and obviously it's your experience, but I really think some people kind of fabricate experiences to make it sound worse than it is. Now, just based on even my personal experience and other people I've spoken with, What was your question again about as a millennial? I'm sorry. I just had a hard time following it.
Because what I want to delve into is this overall picture, because the people who have these platforms out there are painting pictures and images of America that are not true. They're fabricated. And so when we look at the reality of America, if you think let's narrow it down to the black experience in America. Back in the 40s and 50s, coming into that era that's being so attacked now, and it's talking about it's a what's the word I'm looking for? It's this image of family and manhood is just being imposed,
right?
And it's like, no, you go back to that era, particularly in the 50s, and the black American represented the hugest part of middle class America.
In fact, they were growing even ahead of white people as a family, middle class family, just excelling. Which is interesting too, because we talk about this in my classes as well, right? How black people have always been in bondage, always been inferior, and have to fight for their place. And there's a time, I had to fight to have their place as equal citizen.
Right.
But the statements that are made are just not factual. So even in class, they had made the comment that the traditional idea of family was really big in the 50s. Because of like the Leave It to Beaver kind of, period. And then under Republican presidents like Reagan, who talked about family values. And they're like, and it's just not true. There's no facts to support that the traditional family, mom, dad, household is the best way to go. And it was just interesting though.
Unless you discount this altogether.
Exactly. But then it's funny. So they were pinning it on, during the 50s and certain presidents. But I'm like, actually, if you look beyond that, farther back.
Go way back.
Way back. There's been evidence,
history.
That it's just better to have a mom and a dad and a family, like a family unit.
If you go study traditional sociological studies, and I say traditional to get away from this current thought.
Right.
And anthropological studies, we find that in every society, the foundation of every society is not government. It's the family. It's not government. For instance, I talked to you about this off camera, is that if you think back to two great examples of civilization, on one hand we have Sparta, on the other hand we have Athens. Now we look at both of these nations over time, and Athens grew up, it was a center of arts and creativity and all these wonderful things, but it was ruled by this lower self of people, this true democracy where everybody had an equal voice and voted, and they ran this country up, and it disappeared in 120, 125 years. It was done. It was over. It didn't exist anymore. Now you come on the other hand, and you have Sparta. Now, Sparta had something that was germane to the American form of government, which is representative government. Sparta rose up, a dominant nation. Now, we're not going to sit here and say that everything Sparta did was good. Sparta was a warring nation. They were brutal. They did not make accommodations for you if you did not fit their mold. But nonetheless, the people who lived in that country, they had a representative form of government. And so Sparta not only became a great military force, it became a great force of culture and all those other things. And it lasted over 1,000 years. What is the difference? Representative rule versus mob rule.
Right.
And what we are seeing here perpetrated amongst the American minds from the American elites is this promotion of
mob rule. Right.
And so we're going backwards, not forward. And the only way that argument can win is if we allow our brothers and sisters to become our opponents in this. If we forget that we really are a family, we are the family of America. And secondly, we have to allow them to perpetrate a fraud. We have to let them change the definition of words. We have to let them change what history has said,
Right.
so that now the civil rights movement does not have anything to do with, or didn't primarily have to do with, the voters' rights or desegregation, getting away of separate but equal, all those kinds of things, those lies that were perpetrated by that fraud that covered America. We have to allow our brothers and sisters today to go back to that old lie. I have some images I'll share. I'll upload them to Ryan to have him put on, but just some images of what did a classroom look like under separate but equal?
Right.
What did the facilities look like under separate but equal? They were separate and nowhere near equal. Is what it boils down to. Jesus has a principle he uses in the gospel where he says, you cannot serve two masters. You'll either love the one and hate the other, or hate the one and serve the other. You cannot. So separate but equal will never work.
Right.
It will never work, because those who are calling the shots will always favor those who are like them. It's that simple. PLU.
And talking about separate but equal, I'm just trying to follow your thought here. How does that relate to this? Because what I hear from even like CRT, right, critical race theorists, they're not saying that separate but equal is equal. In fact, they even say that it was not equal, right?
But what they're proposing now, you hear the argument about, even in some of our major universities, they're talking about having black-only dorms,
Right.
black-only graduation. So what they're going back to is segregation. They're going backwards in that.
Oh, so what
in
you're
that
hitting
evolution of thought.
on is the fact that what they're saying isn't necessarily what they're doing.
Yeah, because what
Okay.
they're saying and what they're doing are really not congruent. They're saying they are for the people that they're pushing. What they're really pushing for is an elitist idea. Because in order for socialism to be established, in every socialist government you've ever seen, think about what you had, whether you're talking about the socialism of Hitler, or you're looking about the socialism that overtook down in Italy with, was it Romney down there? Rommel was the Desert Fox. Who's the one that was? Mussolini.
I was like, Romney, Mitt.
Down
that, he was back there.
No. Rommel was a
old
Desert
Mitt
Fox.
Romney.
He's all from that era. But Mussolini down in Italy,
Right.
with the black shirts there. I mean, whenever you see socialist government take root, regardless of what you hear people say,
rights.
what happens is that you have a true separation of people.
Yeah.
You have the elites and you have the non-elites. You have the haves and the have-nots. The best image I can give you of a socialist government in its rawest form, without all the apologies for it, is go to the eras of the monarchs in England. You had the kings, you had the royal people, his courts, and all those people
The aristocracy.
who typically lived, the aristocracy who typically lived within the walls. And everybody else supported them.
Yep.
Everybody else worked to support them. And then you had, outside of that community of people who supported them, you had the brigards, the bad guys. And those guys preyed on the people in the middle. So they had the people in the middle over here, who are the serfs and servants, whose whole life is to support the aristocracy or the royalty. And then you have the bad guys, who don't believe in the royalty, but they still need to eat. And so they now prey on the same people.
Right.
And so that is the big picture of what socialism looked like. It's a big promise of provision, but it's minimal distribution. Hey, as you can see, we're in different clothing. So that's because we found, as we were recording the last episode, the one we're doing now in their own words, we had a technical difficulty that we didn't discover until the end of the broadcast.
Love when that happens.
Yeah. So we're back, and we're going to complete that conversation from there. So, Jordana, we'll go ahead and respond to that last question, please, or last statement.
Yeah. So we're talking about socialism, right? And just trying to branch out really what it is to modern times. And one thing that had come to my mind was this whole idea, the concept of Medicare for all, which a lot of the people running right now, that's what they're standing on, right? That kind of socialist platform. And it sounds good from the get-go. Medicare for all, yes. But the one thing I had said, and what I'm thinking about here is the fact that, yeah, okay, you might have coverage, but that does not guarantee care.
Right.
Right? So it sounds good when you look at it, but that doesn't mean you're going to have the care that you need. Oh, yeah, I have insurance, but I can never go to the doctor.
Right.
Or I'm waiting forever. I can never get that surgery that I need.
So big, so good, but nobody can use it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's like, okay, it's not all that
As we
it's
said
not all
earlier,
how it sounds.
There's a reason why people come to America for surgical care. There's a reason why they come in for medical care. Now, don't get me wrong. I think our insurance industry is whacked.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you have to, I got a friend just showed me a case yesterday where her medication for her son, she has one little box of medication, $32,000 for pills. I'm like, seriously? That is the ultimate wrong. Now, on that aspect, I think Bernie has an idea.
Yeah.
But I think Bernie's idea would make it worse. Listening to President Trump, again, I think his reforming of the medical and insurance platform would put us in a better position.
Right.
But, you know, time will tell, I guess, on that one. So it brings us again to this concept of in their own words. So, and the reason I want to do this broadcast is because what we have had happen here of late is that people have changed history. Mm-hmm. They've turned history. Since we started this, since coming back from this one, I part of my journey was that I'd gone to Washington, D.C. for the first time. I'd never been there before. And being able to stand there at the monuments, the different monuments, the Lincoln Memorial, you know, the Washington Monument, all those things, and standing there in their presence and realizing the history mm-hmm. that took place surrounding these monuments. As I stood there at the Lincoln Memorial and just thinking back at the America that existed when Mr. Lincoln occupied the White House, and the fact that my ancestors, your ancestors at mm-hmm. that time, and who knows, Ryan, probably some of your ancestors were slaves at that time here in America. And the momentous occasions that came out of that,
right,
that resulted in the change that we are experiencing today. Standing out there they have it marked on the spot where Dr. King gave the I Have a Dream speech. And I'm standing there imagining back to that occasion, that speech. I also thought about Forrest Gump running through the water, but that's a different story. But we look at that and I think all this stuff has happened. And yet now we have these people, what I call the CET, the critical elite theory, those people who are about power. They are about power more than they wrap it up in concern and social ideas, but what they're really about is gaining power and maintaining power for themselves mm-hmm. at any cost. And they'll sell you out, they'll sell me out, they'll sell anybody out. One of the things I teach a course for the state here and for local police departments on cultural diversity. Excuse me as I bang my mic. And one of the trends we look at is what we call demographic certainty. And that point is that today's 4-year-old will become tomorrow's adult. We know that for a fact. Mm-hmm. And so as the population or the demographics change, the power base changes. And one of the things that we discovered out of that is that over time we realized because of prison rate, because of abortion, predominantly because of abortion, the black population in America is not growing as fast as other ethnic groups. And the one thing that was discovered was that in about the year 2020, about the time we are now, that the Hispanic groups as a population, as a group, and there are 32 different distinct cultural groups within that box we call Hispanic, but still put them in a box for voting purposes, will become the second largest population box in America underneath Anglo or white. And so if you look at that, you begin to understand why all of a sudden all the Democratic debaters are trying to speak in Spanish. Mm-hmm. It's not because they all of a sudden took a Spanish class, because they know the trends that are happening. And it's about getting that vote, that power vote, so they can stay in control. And mm-hmm. they don't care any more about the Hispanic people than they did about the black people. They just
like
want to
you
stay
and I were
in power.
talking the other day that mm-hmm.
If
we just stay in terms of, that these people really believe what they're saying, it's like, no, you're missing it.
Right.
Because when you look at it, follow the money trail, truthfully.
Follow the power and the money.
When it comes
time.
down to it, it's like, look, who's benefiting from this? Why mm-hmm. are they doing it? It has nothing to really do with you.
Right.
It has nothing to do with the average American. That's why they can lie to you. Like there was this video trending a little while ago where Elizabeth Warren was talking at one of those like more smaller town halls.
Right.
And this lady was talking to her about wanting school choice. Like, I want to be able to choose where my kids go to school, my grandkids go to school, so they can have successful lives. Mm-hmm. And then the lady had told Elizabeth Warren, like, your kids, I'm sure they went to, like, private school, and Elizabeth said, my kids went to public school. And then, of course, it comes out later. They went to public school until like 5th grade, and then they were in private schools.
Yes.
And so it's like, be honest. They're not.
They can't be honest because they're lying.
Because there's an agenda there.
Yes,
there's an agenda, and it's not about you.
And you hear them talk about, the little people, and they're all millionaires, and they're talking like they're barely getting by. They're all presenting themselves as something that they're not. For what purpose? So they can stay in power, so they can make decisions to stay in power.
Or I guess what makes me laugh about it is because they might have started like a normal person, right? And so they appeal to that, but then they keep telling the normal people how terrible it is and you can't make it. But I'm like, well, then how did you become a billionaire?
How did you make it? Yeah, how did you make it?
Tell us what you did.
How did Maxine Waters become worth $10 million on public service? How did that happen? And this was one of the great ironies that we go back to this concept of CRT, critical race theory. And then one thing I want to hit on just briefly is this intersectionality, but I want to work up to that. But again, just talking about the CRT is that in a society where critical race theory really rules, if it was truth, then how in the heck do we have a black president under Obama, the most powerful man in the nation? How do we have black billionaires? How do we have black millionaires? How do we have Hispanic millionaires, Hispanic billionaires? It makes no sense.
Right.
If the systems were set only to allow white people to succeed, then how does everyone else work? So then we have to come up with all these other lies. We have to come, but they use the system. The system wouldn't do that. Right. That'd be like me joining the Klan saying, hey, I want to be a Klansman. And they go, well, we're going to make you the Grand Wizard because we want to make everybody feel good about being a Klansman. That's stupid. It doesn't work. And so we have to dismiss our mental faculties to buy into this lie. Right. We have to just be willing to suck it down, hook, line, and sinker, as we say, to let it become.
Which goes back to what you're saying. Like, you look at the older original, like, documents, and it's like, take it in context.
Right.
And like you had said, we're changing definitions, we're doing all these things, which then it loses really what the essence of it, what it was in the first place.
I listened to a speech of Dr. King's that I hadn't really heard, not in completion, in its totality. It was called The Other America. And I would really admonish you guys, if you have a chance to listen to it. I think he gave it up at Stanford. And it was moving toward when we were starting to see some of those achievements coming out of the civil rights movement. And this is what was quoted as being the reason why Dr. King was really assassinated, was that he began to preach, and he made this statement. He said, what good does it do me if I have the freedom and the liberty to eat at the burger counter, but I can't afford to buy a burger? So he started talking about then what was the real power base in America. And it wasn't CRT, it was CET, critical elitist theory. And if you go back, and this is where culture comes in and plays such a strong role. If you go back to the founding fathers of America, what was our base? Our base was Euro-America, European culture. When our founding fathers came here to this country, they transported with them the European culture. What they did not bring was the aristocracy. They brought everything but the aristocracy. And so as a result, that mentality of aristocracy has been ever since trying to establish and reassert itself. We see it in the, especially in the traditions of the South, where we have these people who are better than you just because where they were born, how they were born, who their mom and daddy is, and other people who were considered property just because who their mom and daddy was, and everything that these people who were considered property did was for the benefit of the people who was in this elite class. And if you go back to Europe, you'll see that same thing. I mean, look at Braveheart. Come on, you can take my land, you can take you can't take my freedom. It's all in that. It's that whole thing about I don't belong to you. But see, this is what we brought. This is what you begin to see now. And now we have this new generation of American aristocracy starting to rise up in the political halls, where they have set themselves aside. Their kids are different than ours. They don't go to the same schools our kids go to.
It's just socialism, really, in the sense. I mean, in like pushing towards that, like the haves, the have-nots. I have some control. I make you think you do, but really you don't.
Right.
It's like that.
It's you go again. It's to my mind. It's the whole. Like I said, European monarchy again.
Right.
Yes, we have these people who live inside the walls, who then have their entire livelihood on the backs of the majority. And somehow they make the majority think that it's right. And where the majority think it's not right, they have a military that goes in and enforces and takes their taxes, takes their property for the enrichment of the monarchy. And part of that is that they have to make sure that the common people are disarmed. They cannot have the ability to fight back against the king's army, because that then would destroy the power base. And so we see these same lies that have been played out throughout human history now just coming up again. The only difference is, instead of wearing chain armor and tights, they're wearing suit and ties. There's no difference. There's no different at all. We look at the reign of, and I say the reign of the female power brokers in D.C. It's no different than it was in Europe when you had the queens and the kings, queens who got into power. They had females in power then too. And so we look at all this stuff and we tell these lies if they've never happened before. There's no powerful women. Lie.
Oh, that's so funny. Like, that's like the big joke when we're watching movies.
Right.
Old movies, and they have a strong woman.
Strong
and
female
I'll just,
characters.
you'll make the comment. I'll make the comment like, oh, there's just no strong women in film.
It's something like this is brand new. It's like, what? There's no strong women in
There's
movies.
been strong women in movies for a long time.
Gone with the Wind. Scarlett O'Hara was a very strong character.
I would say even in The Sound of Music,
Very strong characters.
Yeah.
And so we look at all this and we say, we just keep telling the lie, but nobody stops to look at the truth. And so the lie is able to perpetuate itself.
Because too, the idea, talking about changing definitions, the idea of what strong means has changed.
Right.
Where it's like, it's more so domineering and being better than and putting down the other.
It's going closer to the truth, which is
Right.
monarchy.
Yeah.
Where I can do whatever I want to do and you have nothing to say about it. That's what they mean by strong, is that I can say and do whatever I want and you have nothing to say about it. Even though I'm taking your money to do what I'm doing, you still have nothing to say about it. So now we're talking about in their own words. In the first half of this, I gave you some examples from the civil rights movement. Ryan put some of those clips involved, and I really appreciate that, Ryan. Thank you. But what I want to do now is show you some of the fruit that came out of that. Because now when we're able to change the words and change the program of history, things like CRT come to the surface. And out of CRT, we have this intersectionality that comes out of that. And again, my understanding of this is a little bit more shallow than yours, perhaps. So I'm going to say this and you correct me as I go. So out of this intersectionality, as I understand it, if I come to a court system, for instance, and I'm being judged, my situation is being judged, whether it's civil or whatever case may be, intersectionality says that you can't just look at me as a man or an employee. You have to look at me as an employee who is a man. Then you have to look at me as an employee who's a man who's black. Then you have to look at me as an employee who's a man who's black who also identifies in my particular sexuality. So all these different things, and they're all legitimized. And so what happens is that truth gets swallowed up in that. And now we get stuff like, the whole thing, the big joke everybody was saying is that if I'm skinny and I identify as a fat person, how's the joke go? Help me out again.
I said because now when we talk about identities a lot,
right.
And then there's people who are fat identified, they
right.
say. And then there's this meme, it could be offensive, but it said, if I'm fat identified, but I'm thin, does that make me trans fat? And it's the meme with the raptor thinking,
And see, and the reason I bring that up is not to be offensive. I don't purposely try to offend anybody, but I bring it up because of the absurdity of it. We know for a fact that one of the leading causes of death in America is heart disease. We know that. That's not even a joke. I mean, that's real. So why then would we endorse someone who says they're fat identified so they can indulge in a lifestyle that kills them? Mm-hmm. Why would we try to make that legitimate? We know that's not healthy. We know it causes stress on the skeletal system, on the respiratory system. It's not healthy in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But yet we try to make it sound like we're doing them a favor by going along with their espousing their mm-hmm. brokenness and taking their brokenness as wholeness. And it's like, no, you got to come out of that. We do the same thing with this identifying in gender. We mm-hmm. know that the leading group in America that commits suicide are those who are transgender. Mm-hmm. We know that.
But they say that they're committing suicide because they're not accepted in society.
It's because they're breaking their brain. Mm-hmm. Every day of their life, they're living a lie all day long. And eventually that catches up. It just does. It right. catches up. And so it's not the same thing as being homosexual, because I do believe that people are legitimately same-sex attracted. That doesn't mean it's right. I just mean that because of circumstance, situation in their life, they're same-sex attracted. I believe that that's a real situation. But it's one thing to be a guy and say I'm attracted to guys, or to be a girl and say I'm attracted to a girl. That's completely different than being a guy and saying I'm a girl. See, that's a lie. You're living a lie.
What I would say with that is that because there's definitely things that happen that lead people into a really weird headspace,
right,
where they are broken, and they might legitimately think I'm a girl,
right,
but the answer isn't okay, let's do a surgery. The answer is get help.
Yeah, and we knew that to be true,
and that's
for
how
years.
It used to be for a long time,
right.
But now it's like no,
and that comes out of this whole thing of changing history. That's
right.
The whole point of our time together today. Is this idea that you cannot just change
right.
the rules to fit you, because truth does exist. If you lived in a world or a society or universe that did not have truth, then you could do that. But because gravity is real, eventually it's going to pull you to the earth. And so that's what we're looking at. I was looking at this situation now that's come up here recently with, what's her name again? I keep blanking on the congressman from Hawaii.
Tulsi Gabbard.
She's now suing Hillary Clinton. Because Hillary Clinton has made all these statements about her being a Russian spy or a Russian collaborator. I mean, how do you get to say that about a sitting congressman without any evidence?
I'm just like done with it. Like, this is so silly. How much longer can people just do things that are just flagrantly wrong? Okay. I'm talking about people like in Congress, people who are politicians, people like the Clintons, and just get off with it. That's what it just blows my mind.
But
they get away with everything.
But here it goes. When
it's
you look
crazy.
at that, though, you go back to the fact that in a monarchy,
yeah, they can do it.
You do that. That's what I'm saying. I do what I want.
Right.
And you have nothing to say
with
about
no
it.
repercussions.
Right, because
all these
you're
people
in
getting
that.
suicided.
You're in that. So
like,
we come back to this again, and this whole concept again being, in their own words. We have to go back to what our founding fathers said, what our leaders, true leaders, not these current things, but the true leaders have actually said. Look at them in the context in which they were said, and then you go and you say, okay, now I can go forward. But you don't have the liberty of changing definitions and changing words so that you can do what you want to do. And so as we come to the end of this segment, bringing it to a close, again, this is one of those things that really stirs in my spirit, because truth matters. Truth matters. And if we're going to have this conversation, we have to have it based in truth, not in our emotions, not in our feelings, but in truth. Not even just in our experiences, because things happen to people. They do. But what we want to have is the truth. That's why we call this show Behind the Why. Why did it happen? All right. So as we wrap this up, I want to thank you again for spending another section with us here as we tried to get behind the why on this new current that we see in thinking with CRT and intersectionality and just plain lying that we're still going on around us now, where people disregard the truth. But if you will take the time to get behind the why, you'll put yourself in a better position to have ultimate success. So until next time, know that God loves you. I love you, praying for you. Drop us a comment if you agree or disagree. We'll talk back to you in the comment section. But until next time, God bless you. Peace. We're out.